This is the Rise to Triumph podcast, and my name is Chrystal Torres. I am on a mission to discover the key components of success of today's top TV and film industry professionals. If you are interested in becoming a working TV film professional or intrigued by the journey and are looking to surround yourself with the best industry minds, then this, my friends, is for you. Each week, we will have a chance to listen in on conversations that I have with industry professionals and explore the behind the scenes of what it truly takes to rise to triumph. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rise to Triumph podcast. My name is Chrystal Torres. I hope you guys are having a beautiful week and ready for the long weekend. Yay! Hope you guys have some awesome plans. Anyways, if you missed last week's episode, we spoke with Vicki Sampson, who is a sound editor. She's been a sound editor for over 30 years. She's edited for Star Wars and huge films. And so we talk about all about sound and all about how everyone is influenced by sound and why sound is important. And Vicki just has such amazing stories with some amazing actors, directors. So it's a really good listen. So I hope you guys check that out after you listen to this episode where I speak with film editor Ann Trulove. And she also has been editing film for probably over 30 years. And she has worked with directors like Penelope Spheeris, Sofia Coppola. She's done indie films, short films. She's done television, like recently Code Black, Angie Tribeca. But we get her perspective on what the film editor sees on the cutting room floor that we do not. Especially this specifically mostly for actors and, like what is it that sometimes, you're like, oh, there was this really great performance. Like, why didn't they use it? And of course, there's many elements, but she kind of really breaks down a lot of like continuity and just staying in character all times. And it really made me just think of like why people respect, especially like producers, directors, and casting really respect theater actors, because when you're in theater, you're always on. You're not just on for your scene or on when the camera's on you. And she really just gets into all of that. She has amazing stories about Bob Thornton, Alan Rickman, Meryl Streep, Ben Affleck. So I hope you guys enjoy and have a great weekend. Bye. Talking about like what the film editor does, right? Because what I've heard, it's that film editor is the key to help make the film or break the film, kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Bring everything together.
David Mamet, and I am very awkwardly quoting him, but there are 3 rewrites.
Okay.
As far as a film is concerned, and the first is the script.
Okay.
And then the second is production, because what happens in production, just from a practical perspective, a perfect example is The Revenant.
Okay.
They had trouble finding places for where snow was. They had said, okay, let's go here for snow. And then they discovered that global warming was sort of, oh my God, there's no snow here. So we have to move elsewhere. And that's just an example of sort of practical on the ground experience.
Yeah.
That sort of causes you to adjust.
Yeah.
And then footage is shot, film is done. It's always best to have an editor on board while you're still shooting, because the editor cuts along with,
Is that common,
with the
that stuff?
It's not as common as it used to be, and that's a mistake. That's a very bad mistake, because the editor is cutting scenes and looking at the footage, because you have the general progression of shooting is you have the master, you have the medium shots, you have the close-ups, and then you have whatever the director is deciding, you know, how he wants to shoot, exactly. And then the editor can cut a scene and say, oh, this is not, if you want the character of the scene, or if you want this scene to say something, we need a little bit more of this. Yeah. And the director can get immediate feedback.
Got it.
You know.
Yes.
And then maybe adjust the direction of the shooting. And it's very subtle. It's usually very subtle.
But that makes sense to me, because it's like if they're alongside with you, they're looking at what your vision and how it's going to cut to that overall like image and visual that you want to create with your story. So why is that something that's not practiced as often now?
It's about, well, it's about budgets.
But I was like, isn't there a lot of money though?
Well, there is a lot of money, but the money goes to actors, the money goes to the 42 producers, and you'd be shocked at how many of these people who do absolutely nothing. You know, I mean, we spend a great deal of time making tapes, DVDs, you know, these days, you know, uploading them to, you know, distribution sites. And and a lot of these guys, they don't even look at the dailies. They certainly don't look at the dailies, because dailies is, in general.
Can you elaborate specifically what the dailies are?
Okay. Dailies are everything that is shot that day.
Okay.
Okay.
And why is it important for everyone to see that?
Well, it's not important if you don't understand, if you can't. It's not important for producers who are not involved, who are not actively participating in the making of the film.
Yes.
It's unimportant for anybody else, because they don't see the dailies anyway.
Yeah.
But it's important for editor, director, DP, sound guy, you know, a lot of the crew to look at this material and say, okay, this is what I wanted. This is, you know, if there are any continuity problems, if the lighting is messed up, and then the editor, of course, is looking at this. One of the cool things about more established editors, quote unquote older editors, is that we used to screen dailies every night when we were working on film.
Yeah. And
the assistant would take the 35 millimeter, that would be printed immediately by the lab. You would get the dailies, and then you would break it down by scene. And then you would create the picture and sound, because they ran separately, but then you would build them so that they ran in sync.
Yes.
Using, of course, the slate. And the slate for every actor is extremely important.
Why?
Well, because now that we're on digital, it's the same thing, is that somebody is syncing dailies. And not only does the scene and the take have to be identified, it establishes sync, so that the picture and the sound are running together.
Yeah.
So that you're, you know, what you're saying comes out completely in sync, which is the case in real life.
Yes.
So, you know, occasionally we get filmmakers who are cranky about the slates, and a few actors. But you're also dealing with crew who is very professional. They know how to operate slates, like in lots of close-ups. You know, they're very quiet.
Yeah.
But that, what is important is that is a link between what the actor is experiencing on set.
Yes.
It's a way of communicating. So that's the purpose of a slate. And also it's an identification.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a certain performance that you really, really like.
Yeah.
And you know that it was in take 1 or take 2 or take 3. So
And I need to interrupt myself because actors have a lot to deal with on set.
Yes.
But they need to be able to rely. But that's part of their job.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And the key from an editor's perspective is the performance.
Yes.
Because the film is what's important.
Yes.
Ultimately, the story, the film, you need to get it out. The editor is the first audience of the way the film is ultimately going to be. Going back to Mammon's quote. The third rewrite is in the cutting room. Because there is always a great deal of difference between what was written and what is shot, because practical aspects, define how it's shot sometimes. And then the editor deals with what you end up having.
Yeah.
But the editor has to relate,
puzzle pieces, and then you have to kind of like put it all together.
Absolutely. What I like to sort of use as a definition is the writer is incredibly important because he's the one, she, initiated the story. But the director is the captain of the ship.
Got it.
The editor is the navigator. The captain says, I want to go this way. And the navigator figures out how to get there.
Yeah.
And the navigator tends to say, okay, we can go this way, we can go this way, we can go this way, and this is why it's best to go this way, or maybe we go this way. And then it's sort of like it's like a feedback.
Yeah.
The editor and the director get to know each other,
So
understand
how
the
is that
intention.
Relationship that you have to, because you have to have at least a somewhat type of relationship with the editor, the director, and stuff. So how or do do most people hire people that because they're like, oh yeah, I know that person? Or...
Yeah, Spielberg is a perfect example. Scorsese is a perfect example. They always use the same editor. Woody Allen had an editor that he used a lot. And God bless her soul, she passed away. No, that was Quentin Tarantino's editor, Sally Menke. They establish a working relationship. And there's this sort of understanding. I worked with Michael Kahn, who is Spielberg's editor, and he has this sort of, I'm searching for the word, this kind of psychic understanding. Because he's worked with him for for a very long time.
So he already has kind of like I know
Right.
what he looks for in his films.
Exactly. But you don't always have to have, because editors sometimes have to work more frequently than directors, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Their schedules don't sync up. But it's an issue of communication. In TV, usually it's more the story runners.
Okay.
Directors are more hired hands.
Yes. Because they're per episode. They're not there for the whole.
Right.
umbrella.
But it's all about communication. It's all about sort of daily touching base. Because editors are, like I said, their focus is on the film. Their focus is on the vision the director has, or the story runner in the case of television. And if you're working in television, the series sort of build, is related. The series essentially is a feature broken up.
Yeah.
I think depending upon the kind of series, but in general, there's a relationship, if nothing else, but the characters, they have to sort of maintain a certain consistency all through the series. But yeah, the guiding hand is always the director in films. The guiding hand is always the story, the story runner or the producer or whoever is sort of running the ship.
Yeah.
And that's where you sort of get your direction. He says, I want to go this way.
Yeah.
And then the more you understand the character of the director and his body of work, the easier it is to sort of go, okay, this is what he usually likes. But if the director wants to go in a completely different direction on this film or this TV show, that has to be communicated. So it's extremely important for the director and the editor to communicate.
So is that something that then, like, you and the director, like, either in the process of being hired or would sit down and have, like, a conversation about what it is?
Yeah, that's generally how interviews go.
Okay, yeah.
And but the problem these days is that the directors are no longer the decision makers, unless you're dealing with lower budget films where the director is,
More like indie.
Yeah, they're more in control. But what happens is you're dealing with financiers. You're dealing with the business guys.
So the the people that are putting their money in and they want to see their money out.
Right. The problem is that in general, they're not experienced. They have no, sort of film background. They don't understand the language of film. They understand the language of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, actors are in the same position.
Of course.
Their casting is defined quite frequently upon, now we have IMDb where you have that ranking. Yeah.
Literally, you get ranked from 1 to 1,000,000.
Exactly. And that's...
But it's so inconsistent because, one day you're on top because you're on a big hit series. The next day, the next person is on the next hit series.
Right.
Film.
And that's lazy.
Yeah.
That's just, that's
so it's
just
like
a bunch of...
And I think that just goes back to, now everything's just so like, ooh, that's shiny over there. And ooh, that's shiny over here. There's
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is exactly... we're, editors and actors are in the same boat.
Our attention span is like...
Which is really unfortunate because it's so easy to tell a good story. Ultimately, you want to attract an audience.
Yes.
You want to tell a good story. And the thing that you have to... And this is important with actors, too. It's not just about the discipline of being on a set. It's about sort of understanding the quote-unquote product that is going to be projected on a screen someday, or even in YouTube. And what is extremely important is rhythm, with editors, sound editors, all of us sort of quote-unquote below the line. We have to be invisible.
Why?
Well, it's sort of like what Vicky said. You don't want to draw attention to yourself because you want the audience to be caught up in the film.
Got it. Not being caught up like, oh, that's my cut right there.
Right, exactly. The minute...
Like everything is to serve the purpose for the story.
Right. And the minute you get into a situation where you're watching a scene or you've been caught up in this film, and then all of a sudden, it was sort of like what Vicky said in your last podcast, somebody in the audience leans over and says, what did he say? Or all of a sudden there's sort of a bad cut. And usually bad cuts come from producers or power-hungry directors, somebody who, if you'll excuse the expression, needs to piss on the film. It's a shock. It takes you out of the story. If I can use theater as a perfect example. You sit, you're absorbed in the story, if it's a good story. And the audience is the editor because they're watching. They're watching where they feel they need to see.
Yeah.
And we go back to the editor, who is the first audience. And the editor understands the story, The editor sees what he or she can work with. And then, she has their tools. And they try to tell the story the best they can. And they also want the audience, because we're asking them to spend, 2 hours of their time.
Yeah.
We're taking 2 hours out of their lives.
2 hours for them to pay attention.
Right. And we want them to walk away going, wow. Not walking away going, that effect was crap, or, that cut. We're dealing with much more sophisticated audiences, but we're also dealing with incredibly selfish, God bless their hearts. Empathy is critical in the editing process, but it's also critical in the, of course, it's also critical in the acting profession. But I need to go back to the sort of technical aspect, is a bad cut is shocking, but sometimes a bad cut is influenced by the actor who is on the set. And
that's the other side of it.
Right. What you want to do as an editor is bring, and performances, you have to think of the film as a whole.
Yes.
And your performance needs to be consistent with with the rest of the cuts that are in the film.
Got it. You can't just have like this one amazing scene that you did and then everything else.
Right. You can't do a one-off. I mean, they're method actors who sort of, okay, I'm going to try and hold the glass in the other hand because that makes my acting better. And the problem with that is that if you don't follow proper continuity, you are sometimes going to lose your best performance because your performance is intercut with other shots.
Yes. Now, really, let's really go into continuity and how that does affect. Because, I think, when you're going to acting school and stuff like that, those aren't, yes, people to touch on those things, but, what is it that you, the editor in the cutting room floor, when it comes to the actor's performance, that you see that can either benefit them or kill that, like you said, that performance that could have been, that was the best take, but they can't use it because, the continuity wasn't there.
Again, I go back to, we're dealing with audiences that are far more sophisticated because, they have the how we made it, these sort of, like in Game of Thrones, which is my sort of go-to these days.
Yeah.
But
is there any show better than Game of Thrones out right now?
Oh, tons.
Yeah?
And I love Game of Thrones because I'm sort of geek about it, and I'm very forgiving.
Yeah.
But The Wire is one of the most brilliant films ever. And, there's so much about good, brilliant acting. Like, let's go to an example. Billy Bob Thornton.
Okay.
We like to say, well, Bill, for me, I worked on a film that he was in, and Billy Bob is a brilliant actor, but he also keeps acting, even when he knows, because he's also director, that he's not going to be, in the cut, because, you shoot a close-up.
Yes.
And then an actor next to you is going to be talking, and they're going to cut away to the actor who's talking. But Billy Bob is still in character. In the same film, I had a problem, is that I was dealing with everybody was a brilliant actor, and they were always in character. The minute you say action, they are their characters. And a lot of them sort of maintain their characters before and after. They sort of carry their characters around even, when they're not shooting. But that gives us you know, in the cutting room, an opportunity, you know, oh, he has this incredible reaction, and our actor here flubbed his line, or sort of his eyes went in another direction, or there was this sort of moment where he kind of lost it or whatever. And Billy Bob had this, you know, 3 or 4 takes of this particular setup, and you could just go to any one of those takes and you would find this sort of remarkable tiny little reaction.
So even though, so there was 2 cameras then, so there was 1 camera on.
Well, anytime. I mean, usually they're using 2, 3, 4, 8, 10. You know, it depends on the director. But you always, it's like being on stage. You always have to be in character. You know. But I would watch Billy Bob, and he would sort of be settling into character, and he would have this moment of peace because he knew that they were setting up, they were almost ready to go, and he would sort of shift. He was a very much low key kind of guy, but you would see that discipline where he would just sort of, and then, you know, action. And you sort of see the shift from Billy Bob to the character he was playing. And he was character he was playing throughout the take, no matter how long the take was. And I heard something somewhere, and I don't know whether this is the case, but I have seen it in footage that I've cut. Actors don't give as much in wide shots because, you know, they want to be in their close-up.
Yeah, they're saving their energy. Which
Right.
I've heard, like, people are like, oh, save your, you know, like, don't waste all your crying in the.
Wrong. You have to be consistent throughout.
Always be on.
Absolutely. I mean, if you were on stage, you would always have to be on. You're in a permanent wide shot for some people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you need to focus on the character. But you also have to have the physical discipline to maintain continuity.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that becomes something that you should inherently learn. It's like, you know, learning the physicality of the character, all of the stuff that you learn in acting classes and stuff like that. I've talked to a number of acting coaches and just simply asked them, you know, have you had the actors cut some scenes of themselves? And they don't see that as important. I mean, you know, they sort of go into, yeah, you know, a few of them have said yes. Many of them don't see that as an important aspect, but it is. It's critical. Excuse me, because I don't think actors realize that, you know, the story is constructed in the cutting room.
Yeah.
And
I give me chills thinking of that. Yeah.
And you want to be able to control your performance and have your best performance on the screen. And something as simple as holding a glass in the wrong hand could define what take is going to be in the cut. Because your performance is totally screwed if you cut from a wide shot or you cut from a medium and you sort of, you know, as an editor, you really, really, really fall in love with the actors. You want to make sure that they are...
You're watching the scenes.
Right. You know, and you see these performances. We always recognize the brilliant performances, but we see them first separately, and then we have to see them, you know,
together.
We have to see them in relation to the rest of the scene and other people's performances. And so your brilliant performance is not always going to be on the screen, but it should never be defined by, bad continuity, by simply holding a glass in the wrong hand. And this is just something, just something relatively simple to remember. Most good actors understand that, and then the other thing also is that if you go into a cutting room, you're dealing first with the editor, and the editor cuts together the rough cut, or however they define it these days, but we identify it as the rough cut. And the rough cut is the script. We take the script and we build it based upon the script. And then the director sees it. And, he or she sees what works and doesn't. And then the director's cut, you start to compress the film. You start to add more energy. Many times, a few times you have to protect a lead actor's performance because they're not very good in the daily.
Then how are they then the leads because of finances?
It's that sort of indefinable something. There are people who work on screen, and there are just simply people who don't.
So maybe they're not the strongest actor, but there's just something about them that just gravitates on the screen.
Yeah. And also to a certain extent, but also something as simple as being easy to cut.
Cut like butter.
Yeah. So it's like Billy Bob Thornton. You can use any frame of footage of him. Yeah. And so the editor and the director, most importantly, and then the producers and whoever else is going to, influence the cut. If they want to cut it another way, let's get to this person's close-up, or I want to see more of this big actor, because we have to give this big actor more screen time. But you need to sort of bridge the gap with, supporting characters, et cetera, et cetera. If the editor or the director can't find footage that will bridge that gap or will, maintain, that because of something as stupid as, the actor is not consistent with continuity. I mean, it's then the editor and the director are going to start getting really pissed off because the actor is not consistent. Mm-hmm. And because it's something as simple and as stupid as, they did the wrong thing in take one as, and then take two is different, and then take three, they went back and, but their performance was not as effective. And and it's a simple discipline. I mean, ultimately the key is the performance, but it's not just their performance, it's everybody's performance.
Yes. I like that you say that, because you're like, oh, this is my moment. But it's for the film.
But then if you're also, you're saying my moment, and that's important, but you have to understand that it's still an ensemble piece.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the best actors that are, like that you say, that they always have the consistent performance, they have understood that?
Yeah. I mean, I always go back to British actors, great, Royal Shakespeare. There is a discipline, a physical discipline, but also acting to them is a job. It's not, now this is my moment, I have to show off, I have to be this, that, or the other thing. They know what their place is, and they get to know the character. You see, there are no small parts, only small actors. That is, a phrase that goes back decades. And you just take your character, no matter how small it is, and, the director is sort of your go-to person. If you've cut it's always good to, to get to know other people's functions. Some actors, they're not working a lot, but they can also use the time to shoot a short with them starring, understand how post-production works. It's not, it's not about, that's not their job, but it's part, it affects their work. I remember when I went to a SAG screening of a film that Ben Affleck directed.
Yes. Oh, which film is it?
Hollywoodland. He was directing, I think, Gone Baby Gone before, at that point, my time frame may be sort of off. Yeah. But at that point, I was the only editor in this audience of about 300 actors, and I asked a question, can you talk about the role of editing in the filmmaking process? There was this sort of overall groan from the actors. Really? And I thought that was rather funny, but Ben, just hopped on that and he said, no, wait a minute. And he said, the first person on the crew whose ass you have to kiss is the editors. And it's true. It's always good to talk to editors. It's always good to edit yourself. And then you realize, because editing is part of, an editor, is part, influences your performance. An editor will affect your performance. And how you perform on the set. When you look at British actors, and you even see British actors in tiny, tiny little parts, they give it their all. They have sort of focused, and there are a lot of American actors who are very good. I'm not dissing, I don't want to, let my Anglophilia, alienate American actors. But again, there are no small parts, only small actors, and it's kind of fun. I was an actress on stage for a long time, and I would have these tiny little parts, but it was always fun to sort of walk on, do your little thing, and get to know the character, and get to know how the character should interact. I mean, you always go back to the captain of the ship, the director, because he's watching, he's witnessing, and he is also sort of watching just continuity. The script supervisor is quite frequently, paying attention to that kind of stuff. It's just that you are not, from an actor's point of view, you are part of a whole. And the more you understand about the filmmaking process, the better you become as an actor. And it's like anything. The editor has to know his or her tools to the point that it's just their right brain operating, because like we work on Avid or Premiere Pro or what, okay, see, you hear the left brain starting to function. But the creative side has to dominate when you're putting a film together. And so we, as editors, have to be very familiar with the editing systems that we work on. Now, learning a new editing system is always a pain in the ass. And if you just want to simply shift a piece of sound or move a cut, sometimes it, becomes an act of Congress. And it sort of affects the rhythm that you're trying to establish. So editors tend to tend to be a little cranky, you know.
It's not personal.
It's not personal. It's about the software. And I worked on film initially, and film, it's analog, it's common sense, and everybody worked in film for 100 years.
Yeah.
And it works. But film is also physically, you know, there's a lot of physicality associated with film. But even then, as an editor, your brain is working. So you're cutting up here. The best editors are the editors who can sit down in dailies. And dailies is usually a scene that you're shooting. It's all the coverage, wide, medium, to, you know, singles, that kind of thing. And the editor is watching all the takes, all the setups, and
making notes.
Sometimes, always, the assistant is making notes, whatever. The director is saying, I like this, I like that, I like this. It's still the same process, you know, you know, digitally. But you don't have that kind of, you know. Anyway, we didn't have that sort of easy, you know, less work heavy digital capability. So the editor had to use his or her brain. Mm-hmm. And then usually the editor learned this discipline of cutting the film in their, you know, physical computer, which is the brain. Wow. Yeah. There's a great story with Michael Kahn, going back to him. One of his assistants told me, in Saving Private Ryan, Michael would cut on a moviola. Okay. Now, all of you young actors should check out moviola and just look at the little machine and go, oh my God, how can human beings cut on that? Michael knew that. Mm-hmm. Michael knew how to cut on that, and it was like second nature to him. Wow. You know, it's like walking. It's like anything that you like, going to the bathroom. It's, you know, anything that you learn and you do without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Skiing or anything like, you know, anything that you have become so familiar with it that it's second nature. Yeah. The D-Day invasion is like what? The first 20 minutes, first half an hour of the film. Yes. Michael cut that film from dailies, hundreds of thousands of feet of film, multiple cameras. He cut that film, he cut that scene. It was his quote-unquote rough cut. And the assistant told me that his rough cut, apart from a few shot changes, was what you see in the finished film. Wow. In part because he and Spielberg had this strong working relationship. In part because it was his brain that was a computer at the time.
Mm-hmm. So everything was just like getting cataloged.
Right, exactly. When we went digital, it was, well, what we call it, the digital bloodbath. Huh. There were two really big issues. You could shoot endlessly. And filmmakers started to get a little lazy. Actors got a little lazy. And sometimes actors want to direct their own pieces and stuff like that. But with 35 millimeter, you know, you have to, you know, you're working with small negative reels and stuff like that. But it actually costs, it just makes people, I think, a little lazy, because you just sort of let the film roll for as long as you want it to roll. And then, oh, we'll catch that little bit, and we'll catch that little bit. And what you don't realize, you know, you're dealing with 5 or 10 minute takes, or you're resetting, which is fine. Yeah. And I guess, you know, all I'm saying in that regard is We are filmmakers, not garbage men. And that's a Werner Herzog quote. You know, walk onto the set with a plan. Walk onto the set with, you know, I know my character, I know my process, and I just simply have to, you know, learn how everybody works, and you do your best. The biggest thing, the most important thing is that you protect your performance, but by the physicality is part of it. That's your body is your tool.
So you gotta take care of your
And if you don't have to remember, you know, if you understand continuity, or if you understand sort of the cutting process, that's not the priority. Your priority is being the actor. But like editors, you know, we have to understand our tools. That's part of our craft. So the less we have to think about, you know, what you have to do to move a shot, then, because don't actors, well, acting coaches and stuff like that, don't they sort of teach you physicality, you know, breath and all that other stuff?
Well, now it's like compartments. I mean, I don't know, I guess it depends what school you go to, but it's like different classes. So it's like in one class you're just doing like scene study, and then if you take another class, that's just like movement, and you know, it's just like, so I think it's more I mean, and that just depends what type of school you go to. I went to like a conservatory, so they had where you can do like the whole package, but it was all different classes at once. It wasn't like you were doing movement and vocal and scene work in the same class, you know?
Yeah.
So it was like, you know, you did that, and then you were supposed to then do your own homework. You're doing your own homework at home,
right?
And then you're supposed to show up prior to your acting, you know, doing your movement, doing your breath work, so that then you are prepared.
Yeah, and that's important. The only thing that would trouble me about that is that because I have a BA in theater, and again, was initially planning on being an actress. I scrapped that partly because I loved editing too, because it was storytelling. And I love stories.
Do you feel like as an editor you probably have way more control than an actor?
Yeah, you do. And actors' careers can live and die in the cutting room. Because if you piss a director off because he or she can't cut to a wide shot or a two shot because, you know, you're doing something totally different from the other take, just physically. I've seen it happen in a couple of films that I worked on. And, you know, these were supporting characters, but, you know, they just...
Can you give like an example of like what... I know you've touched on it, you know, like continuity and stuff, but like, can you give like a specific, you don't have to like name anyone, you know, but just like something that someone can be like, oh, okay, so that they don't do that, or like you know, so you're more aware of those things, because sometimes, you know, you're just trying to be free in the moment, and then you're not trying to constrict yourself. But
that's the key, is that, you know, this is not a stage performance, this is film. And you do want to be free in the moment but the one way you are restricted is that you have to be where you're supposed to be consistently through all of the coverage.
Yeah.
You know, if you have established, or you and the director have established, or you and, you know, your other acting, you know, because you're always blocking scenes, of course.
Yeah.
You have to sort of, because when you're on stage, you're fairly consistent with your performances from one night to the next. Well, you have to maintain that discipline on a film set.
Yeah. The only thing for me is like sometimes like you don't, like the rehearsals that you would get for theater, you don't get on film. And sometimes the way you would probably map it, like the scene in your head for like, you know, the film or this show that you're working on. But then you get there and then everything's different because it's like you said, it's not practical. So then, you know, something's over here, something's, and then so then the way from the actor's point of view, and you know, I can see where like sometimes then you walk in and it's different. So maybe you did work it out, but then everything kind of like.
But that's where the flexibility comes from. That's
Yes.
where because again, like you say, it's always different. You know, the editor, you know, he or she has a script, but he or she is not going to necessarily get the footage that will go exactly where the script is, or a line will, you know, sound really stupid and or not work with the rhythm of the scene, or make the actor look bad, or whatever.
And I feel like that's probably what sets apart people like Bob Thornton. You've mentioned in the past, like Meryl Streep, that, you know, you told me and you used the phrase, you know, cut like butter.
Right.
That's probably why, you know, even though Meryl Streep doesn't have, you know, she doesn't need social media, because it's like she has the reputation, because you know that whatever she brings to you in her performance, like that's golden.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is that she sort of falls into her character. She has, you know, I'm sure, you know, because she's Meryl Streep, she sort of, you know, she's given the leeway, but she's disciplined. You know, because it's not just the editor, but if you're inconsistent, even with your sort of physicality, you're going to throw the other actors off.
Yeah. And that just goes with like making strong choices. Like you need to know, like, this is how my character would be, not like sometimes they wrap their arms and then sometimes they don't, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's something as simple that, you know, that could really screw things up. It's really sort of situational. It's just it seems something as simple as that should not affect how I'm going to cut your scene.
Yeah, no, and now saying that out loud and hearing what you said, it's like, you're right, you know, because if you have the discipline, if you know the character, if you have their mannerisms, then no matter what situation, whether I walk into this house or, you know, a backyard somewhere, you know, an alleyway, I'm still going to be Chrystal, because I'm Chrystal, you know, so yeah, I think it's just like how you said, it just goes back to the fundamentals of just doing the work, doing the, you know, being disciplined in the character.
It's part of that sort of, you know, vocal work or physical work, or, you know, learning an accent. It's something that you want to get to a point where, you know, I mean, there's a little bit of you in there, but, you know, it's something you don't have to think about. And then you can concentrate on your performance. And then, you know, it's also critically important, just from an overall perspective, is don't be an asshole. Because sometimes it's just as simple as, you know, hey, you know, get along, you know, hey, no problem, let's do this, let's do that. Because, I mean, you have to realize that people are, you know, going to be watching you, and they're going to be watching you sometimes long before the slate and long after the slate. And that can affect how that can affect the director sitting in the cutting room, and then, oh God, I didn't realize what an asshole this person is. And, you know, they're just going to sort of pass judgment on you. Not, you know, casting directors pass judgment upon you. You're always going to be judged.
Yes. Everybody's judged.
But you can control. You can have a certain level of control.
Got it.
By just, you know, understanding where your performance goes after they finish shooting.
Yes, because I'm only remembering that, you know, those 3 weeks that I was on set and I shot, you know, those scenes. But you and the cutting room floor, you're seeing hours and hours and hours over the same scenes over and over again.
And we have to, the film, again, is the most important thing. Steven Spielberg, I worked briefly with him. He was giving notes on a film that I had worked on a number of years ago. He was talking about one of the Lost Ark, Raiders of ... movies with Harrison Ford. And there was a scene, they had spent 2 weeks and several $1 million shooting. It was like a chase scene or something like that. He said, well, we ended up not using it because it didn't serve the story.
So it wasn't that it was good.
Right.
It was just...
Because, the story may change.
Yeah.
Because, again, this big multi-million-dollar chase scene just didn't serve the story.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, with editors, directors, you can't really fall in love with the footage. You have to look at the film as a whole. Because you are the audience. And the audience doesn't know how much it cost to cut that, to shoot that scene. The audience doesn't know, it took 2 weeks. The audience doesn't care. They want to walk in and just sort of be taken away by this story. And I'm still a goofy moviegoer, and that's all I want to do. I think what affected me the most, what influenced my choice to become an editor, was certainly Star Wars. I saw that 12 times.
Wow.
The summer it was released, and Jaws. And that was created by Verna Fields, an editor.
Yeah.
Steven shot the footage, but Verna knew what worked and what didn't.
Yes.
And the thing is that I remember even further back, I was like 8 years old, and we were up in upstate New York, and at this retreat, and there was this professional storyteller. And one rainy day, we all sat on this huge covered porch, this sort of log cabin recreation center. And all these little kids were all gathered around, and this guy was a professional storyteller. And he told a story, just like, audio books and stuff like that, doing different voices. But you're watching him too. And he told a story. I'm young in an earlier period of time when this was sort of an acceptable story, but Burr Rabbit and, the Tar Baby.
Yeah.
Now it's not politically correct. But when you're kids, it's all about the story. And he was riveting. I lost track of time. And it's just one man telling a story with all these voices, and the physicality and stuff like that. And I think that that affected me. I still can visualize it.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized that our lives are a story. And that's when I realized that telling stories is one of the best things that you can do. And telling stories that are, they give you a message sometimes that affect, look at Star Wars, look at Jaws. They still have an effect upon people. And it wasn't, and the fact is that, it wasn't just about the actors. There were there were special effects and stuff like that. So the actors were, lots of green screen these days. So you have to sort of use your mind to put yourself in the place.
Yeah.
And that's part of your art. I want to go back to these sort of acting classes.
Yes.
When I majored in theater, it was this real old guy who called it was Miss Trulove and Miss La Spisa and Mr. Grecian. And but he was not only teaching us physicality and talk, make sure your voice hits the back of the theater and that kind of thing, but he taught everything. He took us through the entire process, and he also directed. So he sort of provided us a certain level of continuity. Now his acting, his teaching was a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit more sort of, John Barrymore and Sarah Bernhardt, sort of standing on the stage and pontificating. It isn't, it wasn't being absorbed in the character per se.
Do you think that that an actor that maybe isn't the most talented actor, but they do the continuity, they have that certain discipline of just like, I guess, keeping everything consistent. Do you think that might help them with an actor that's maybe talented, but then like, holding something here and then the others take their flapping their hands?
The one thing that every actor needs to realize is it's not just about being good. It's about doing the best you can and understanding, how a film is put together. Because there is that certain something. There are Academy Award winners whose performances were created in the cutting room.
Heard that.
Yeah.
How does that happen? What?
Well, it's not just because it's not so much about that they are the greatest actors. It's just that they have it's just they have a certain something.
And what would that certain? Because I know you mentioned that. Like, what would be that certain something? I mean,
that's sort of a difficult thing to say.
Yeah. Just like an essence. Or like
Did you see Die Hard?
I have watched it. I didn't get to watch it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Everybody watched Die Hard, though.
Well, it's I have to use Alan Rickman as a perfect example.
Alan Rickman, or most millennials will know him as Snape.
Snape,
from Harry Potter.
yeah. But you need to go further back.
Yes.
You need to see, because in Die Hard, that was actually his first movie.
Yes.
And he said that he got cast because he was cheap. He's a brilliant stage actor, and he's British. But he took the character and he made it his own. And as a result of doing that, it was based upon his experience. It was also, about where he was and what he needed to do. I mean, he sort of pissed the producer off, because he said, he just made a couple of simple notes. This will make me more comfortable. But the thing about it is that it's important for you to be comfortable in your character, and I think it was like a costume note. I'll feel better in longer, nicer suit or whatever. But, and, there are a number of articles about his performance in Die Hard, because he is included in the list of one of the best bad guys ever. And I fell in love with him, quite frankly, as a result of that. Again, it's a performance that just sort of is locked in my memory. And Johnny Depp, when he initially, the first Pirates of the Caribbean, he just sort of said, "I'll do this." I mean, the executives were all just freaked out, because what the hell is he doing?
Yes.
I mean, he was at that point in his career very, powerful, and this is the way I want to do it, and
yes, they listened.
And
it was brilliant.
Right. But the thing you need to realize is that your performance is going to be cut down. And the editor is going to take the best pieces of your performance. And the editor is going to decide where where you can fit, and there's always going to be a little great moment. And the more you inhabit the character, the more screen time you might end up doing, because you're supporting, the purpose of your character is, is to serve the story.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to there are no small parts, small actors. It's just, going back to the sort of acting, I wish there was a bit more consistency with acting coaches, that they, that they taught sort of the overall aspect of acting, instead of sort of dividing it into little chunks.
I think it just goes back to like what we said earlier, like how like everyone's so impatient. Everyone just wants like, what's the one quick thing that's going to get me so I can get that role and I could bang it out.
Then, that goes into the realm of casting director and stuff like that. And, but the set is a completely different animal, Just, if you become physically disciplined, if you understand at least basically the process, ADR, that's, no actor really should hate ADR, automatic dialogue replacement. When you go into the soundstage and there's bad sound and you have to replace something, it's not the way it used to be.
Yeah.
ADR can be very easily incorporated into your performance. And the problem with some actors is they quote unquote hate ADR. But again, everybody on the, everybody below the line, and I sort of hate that term because everybody, has an important role.
Yeah.
Well, above the line, producers, directors, actors, but the problem is that below the line, it diminishes our role in the filmmaking process. And, it's like, hey, we have your performance in our hands, and we can put you on the cutting room floor, or we won't. But I know I've worked on big budget films, and the motives behind keeping someone on camera, or you're getting notes from people who are not interested in the story. They're not interested in making sure that the film is contiguous, that it's, that it works as a whole. They seem to think that we need to give this person more screen time, or we had a preview and the people didn't laugh as much, so let's take that out. I worked on some big budget comedies where they didn't seem to even, just simply understand the concept of a joke, which was the only way a joke can be funny is set up punchline. And they would just sort of listen, these people are not laughing, so they would take the setup out, and then the punchline was no longer funny. So, you are sort of dealing with younger people who don't have, who have the attention span of a gnat, and they're defining how a film works based upon, an audience that, no matter how sophisticated we are as TV goers or film goers,
I wanted to ask you another question before I forget. You had mentioned before about actors cutting themselves. So what are ways that, for any actor that's listening to this, I myself included, what can I do now moving forward to make sure that when I get on set, it's like my performance is clean, or like, just learning from I guess my habits or whatever.
Well, sometimes you don't necessarily have to shoot like a short film, or, you know, sometimes you guys can sort of gather and, you know, do a scene from a film or do a scene from a, this is something that I wish, you know, acting coaches would do, is that they would actually shoot a scene. And it would be a good idea to have an editor there, you know, because you don't necessarily have to cut the scene yourself, but if you get an experienced editor, or if you talk to a few editors or something like that. I mean, I am certainly not the greatest, you know, the most well-known editor, and I certainly don't have a body of work that some editors do have. Oh, Lulu.
Lulu's crying.
She wants to come in.
We'll wrap it up soon. Want to bring her in?
Yeah, let's do that.
Here.
Oh, the boys got quiet.
I think they like hear you and you sound calm. So
Yeah. Come on, baby. All right.
Hey, Mama. You didn't want to come out.
Okay, Lulu, place. Lulu, place. Come on, baby. No, 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 no. Lulu, place. Good girl. No, 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 no. She's old. She
It's
defines.
fine. It's
Lulu,
fine.
down.
She's just excited. She wanted to
Down.
be back inside. Yeah.
Good girl.
She'll be calmer.
Yeah. But what was I talking about? You know, it goes back to understanding the whole process.
Yeah.
And I have told casting, you know, acting coaches who I've known and met through, you know, a number of years of working in the industry. You really should teach your actors, you know, what happens after you're done, because it's such a critical aspect of, you know, the filmmaking process. And it's not just about you as an actor. It's about a whole bunch of people. Oh, hair.
Here's another.
Yeah, it's about the cost, you know, what, you know, the people behind the scenes, who are giving you the costume that, you know, puts you into character. Because an actress, you know, the costume, you know, would make me feel like the character. And but you also have to be aware, and it's kind of boring because sometimes, you know, there's the technical aspect, and, you know, as well as the artistic aspect. But we are going to influence and affect what you ultimately see on the screen.
Yeah.
And the more you understand what we do, the more you protect your performance.
Yeah.
And
So what are ways that we can start to inhabit those things where we can...
well, again, if you inhabit the character, then,
Yeah.
you know, because that's your role. That's what we want to protect. That's what we want to work with.
You had said something about like practicing, like shooting yourself. Is that something?
Well, I think that, you know, as editors, I was a
or
group,
editing yourself. That's what you said. Like actors editing themselves. So like,
or at least watching the editing process, because it's sort of like Ben Affleck. He didn't really. He actually confessed he didn't really quite understand.
Yeah.
He wasn't as well-rounded until he started cutting. He didn't realize how important the editing process was to the actor's performance. And then
when he started directing and doing his own films,
right,
it was like, oh.
Right. And it's just, you know, if you get a basic understanding of, like, with Vicky, sound, but especially editing, because editing drives, you know, ultimately editing sort of drives everything else.
Yes.
You know, sound is critically important.
Yes.
It's so, you know, what I hate about the psyche these days is that we spend so much money during production. We can get a cheap, you know, kid out of film school to cut. You know, what happens is the budget goes on screen, but, you know, what happens behind the screen could turn it into complete crap. And it's also about, you know, how many people want to sort of stick their foot in it, you know. You know, it's just, you need to recognize that you're not complete, you know, you're part of, you know, you're part of a whole.
That's been the theme today. You're part of a whole. It's not about me. It's about
the
story. And I think that's just a great takeaway, just in general, just to like remind yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, from the other side of the coin, you know, the actors just trying so hard to get noticed, trying so hard to prove themselves, that I almost think that sometimes it's not intentionally to show like, oh, it's about me, but sometimes it's just like you feel like that's what you need to do in order to stand out.
Well, yeah, the thing about the problem is that people sort of look at the end. You know, there are a lot of film students these days, directors, and you know, they're all, you know, they're looking, you know, they walk into USC or whatever film school, and they're thinking about their 3-picture deal down the line, and then they sort of, you know, they sort of lose, you know, they forget that this is a journey, you know,
the journey.
And that you have to understand the process. You know, as far as editing yourself, or, you know, it's just, you know, you can talk to editors. You can, if you're on a shoot, you know, just get all sorts of feedback, you know, and talk to people who are much more experienced, because they've seen it, they've done it. They, you know, it's sort of like Vicky, you know, 40 films. Have I got stories to tell you? But the thing is that there are rules that are consistent throughout your career, throughout
whatever technology comes up or doesn't. Yeah, there's just certain things that are rule of thumbs. You know,
and just, you know, sort of concentrate, for an actor, just concentrate on what's happening in this particular role. And, you know, also sort of structure your life so that, you know, there is, you eliminate fear, you know, that I have to make.
Fear. Total. You don't want fear to drive you. Yeah.
Yeah. That's even worse than, you know, making sure you pick up a cup with the right hand. But if you pick up the cup in the right hand all the time, that will, you know, that's more likely to propel you in the right direction. It's just, you know, you need to be, you know, you need to have, you know, you need to make sure that, you know, you structure your life, like Jim said. So, which in such a way that allows you, that frees you from emotions that will interfere with your performance. Don't ever get yourself in a situation where desperation drives you, or fear drives you, or anything like that. Live in a tiny apartment, have a few roommates, or, you know, a director friend of mine whose only film I cut, young guy. Oh, well, I know he directed a documentary before that. He now has an extremely successful TV series, which he created. John, brilliant director, and he shot this exceptional film on a low budget, from Nebraska, very, you know, just very intelligent. But his wife was a teacher, and they had budgeted their lives around, you know, Kathy's income. When he wasn't working, he was also a screenwriter. When he wasn't working, you know, they still lived according, you know, their lives were structured around Kathy's income, because she was sort of the consistent one. And then when he started getting big money for his for his screenwriting, for his scripts and stuff like that, that would allow them to sort of buy a house,
Yeah.
and, but they sort of lived according to his, they lived in such a way that John was able to sort of, very practical, and, I mean, I'm sure John has a bigger story to tell you, but I always thought that that was brilliant because, you're an actor. And you can get involved in side projects or write scripts or write stories or, there are a lot. I think the thing is that whatever you do, it has to, it's something that you can sort of walk away from, or if you have a spouse, who has sort of a regular living, then you live according to that spouse's income.
Got it. Yeah. So you don't get caught up with that one check, and then there's not another one. And
right.
Now
Exactly.
Your dead, and then you go bankrupt. Yeah.
Well, stuff. But and that that's so sad that I have to sort of, that the first thing I go to when people ask for advice is just make sure you have fuck you money. Just never let money define your choices.
But that's good to hear, because it's like you said, especially now, it's like everyone's trying to show that, like, look, I made it. You really didn't, So it's just like those are just great things. Yeah. Amazing, good stuff. I wanted to wrap it up. I want to. But is there any closing statements or anything that you want to leave us with? No pressure.
Oh, you know what? The other thing is that I told you that story about Kevin McKidd, who was in Rome. And he was doing a dinner scene. This is interesting. There's a TV show called Blue Bloods.
Yeah.
And every week they have a dinner scene.
Yeah.
And they're always wide shots or two shots or something like that. And dinner scenes, those kind of things are a nightmare to cut, especially if there is inconsistency as far as the act. And it's, it's all about the stupid ass utensils or something like that. And these are real pros. So, and then the other thing also is that, nobody's going to notice that he or she has the fork in the right hand. It's,
yeah.
You sort of balance things out, because people aren't paying attention to that kind of stuff. As long as it, it's not, because if the performance is great, then nobody's going to care that the fork or the knife or anything like that. But that doesn't give you, that's important. That doesn't give you the right to sort of screw around.
Yeah.
But anyway, Kevin was talking about he was doing a dinner scene, and this was in Rome, and he was doing a scene with Polly Walker and James Purefoy. And at least this is how he told it. He couldn't understand why James and Polly was like nibbling on a grape all through the scene, and James just was sort of, had his glass of his cup of wine, and Kevin was hungry that day. And so he was just eating the food. And then he realized the mistake he made, because then the continuity lady, this is, all sort of the Brits, she comes up and, okay, on this line you need to be holding the swallow, and, you take a bite on this line, and yeah. And so it's all this crap that he had to remember. And then he understood why Polly was gnawing on nibbling on a grape all through the scene. And you need to sort of adjust so that you don't have to think about it. You need to simplify things, especially in wider shots and dinner scenes and stuff like that. It's hard for editors. It's as hard for editors as it is for actors, those sort of wide shots. But also, never listen to anybody who says, save everything for the close-ups, because
that was a huge takeaway. Yeah,
the editor and the director will start hating you. because if you make a mistake that defines how they cut the film, they're not going to like you anymore.
You do not want to not be liked. You want to be on the next project.
Right. Yeah, I know. There was an actress in this one film that I was sort of an associate editor on. There was this one actress who was like New York method, and, you know, I think she just wanted to get attention by changing her performance every scene, and whoa, our director just could not say enough about how she hated her. Of course, we all didn't like her because she was just, you know, a supporting character. But she affected how we cut, you know, particular scenes.
Yeah, because she was like in scenes with like probably leads and whatever.
Because she was, you know, she was first, you know, positioned in one way on one take and in another way on another take, and she was waving her arms in one take, and then she had her arms down, or she had this.
And to her, she was like, "Oh, I'm doing all this stuff. They're gonna have so much good takes from me, so many different options."
Yeah, but you can give options without being so obnoxious about it.
Yeah.
And because it's not just about you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I end up. But understand the whole process. You know, if you're going to acting classes, spend a little time checking out editing, sound, post, you know, there you go. Listen to your podcasts.
Yes. We're going to talk to everyone.
Oh, hell yeah.
Getting the whole process together.
Yeah, it's, you know, I can give you the names. I mean, the acting thing is important, but, you know, but also practical advice. That's extremely important because you want to be free. And that could affect your success as well.
Yeah, those subtle things where you're like, I thought I did great in that film. And then, like, the actress probably thought she did amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then...
There's one more thing, just one more thing really quickly.
Go ahead.
I have an editor friend who found success as a result of every year he would go to the AFI Film Festival, which is where a lot of young directors sort of, you know, they're presenting their first films.
Mm-hmm.
And Darren would attend all the films, well, practically all the films, whatever time allowed. And he would see, and those films that he was impressed with, he would introduce himself. Mm-hmm. Say, I really liked your film. I'm an editor. You know, I'd like to get to know you better. I'd like to understand your process, hear about, you know, and ask a few questions about the film and stuff like that. But that is how he met directors that he now works with. And he's very successful, but also he's working on films that he loves. And he's working with directors that he can communicate with. And I think that that's also important, you know, so that if you're working with good directors, so watch a lot of films. You know, and say, hey, I like this guy. I like the way he tells stories. I like what he's doing with so-and-so. And they may not be big box office, but if it's something that you will feel comfortable doing, good performances, you know. Yeah. It'll bring out the best in you so that you don't have to. Short films are a good way to learn who you want to work with and who you don't.
So I'm going to start doing. That's awesome.
There you go.
I could talk to
Lulu is very impressed. She has, you know.
She has been so good, all of them.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Ann Trulove, the film editor, and her perspective on what she sees behind the scenes, in post, in the cutting room floor. And I just thought it was really enlightening and a really great perspective. So yeah, hit me up. Rise to Triumph Podcast, risetotriumph.com, subscribe to the website. I will start sending out newsletters. I promise. I'm working on that. And yeah, you can follow me, Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. Chrystal Torres. Peace out, guys, and see you in the next one.